One of my favorite bands of all time broke new musical ground, influenced many musicians, but has this band been forgotten? Not here. This is the Kazdoy Closet. I'm Kazdoy. Here's my closet full of all the stuff that I love. Today we're going to talk about the great band Roxy Music, and I think you'll be surprised how I rank their albums from best to worst. When I was in high school in the 70s, I asked another student what music he's listening to. He said he's listening to Roxy Music. I said, what kind of music is that? And he said, it's just Roxy Music. And I didn't know what he meant at the time, but I certainly do now because they're pretty hard to define. They got together in London in 1970, and there's so many different influences in their, especially their first albums. 50s rock, 60s rock, jazz, pop, electronic sounds, avant-garde, ballads, European sounds, even some cinematic flavors to it. And the interesting thing is sometimes two or more of these elements would be together in one song. Basically, they were very experimental, and they also always included a dash of humor and some wordplay in their lyrics. They went on to influence a lot of art rock bands, glam rock bands, new wave, and artists such as David Bowie. They also took chances with their wardrobe and their costumes, which I'll show you in a minute. The main people behind Roxy Music were Bryan Ferry, the main songwriter, lead singer, played keyboards; Brian Eno, who played keyboards and synthesizers and what he called treatments, meaning he electronically treated the other instruments in the band to make them sound different; Phil Manzanera on guitar, the very unique style; and Andy McKay, who was a classically trained saxophone and oboe player. And the saxophone gives it that 50s, 60s rock sound. And oboe, well, how many bands, rock bands, can you think of that include an oboe player? So it just kind of shows you how different sounding some of their songs could be. Now, this is Roxy Music's first album. It came out in 1972, the first of many albums with a lovely young lady on the cover. It's probably their most experimental album, and they did have a hit single in the UK called Virginia Plain. There's a lot going on this album. A lot of soloing, sometimes simultaneous solos, some weird shifts in tones and styles, often in the same song. The one song is a tribute to Humphrey Bogart. Another song has a country and western flavor to it. The songs range in length from 3 minutes to 7 minutes. Bryan Ferry is still trying to find his vocal style. It kind of varies from song to song. And Brian Eno's weird electronic effects are everywhere, all over this album. Now, this is the box set, and this includes this hardbound glossy book, which is pretty good. The only bad part about the book, there's some photos of the guys and some memorabilia and some explanation of how they got together, etc. The only bad part about this book is it doesn't give a song-by-song description of the story behind each song. Now, I mentioned their interesting choice of wardrobes, and here you have it. So a lot of, here's Bryan Ferry, the lead singer. So he's kind of got a 50s juvenile delinquent thing going on. There's the sax player, Andy McKay, Phil Manzanera. There's Brian Eno with his leopard skin outfit. Paul Thompson, the drummer, was with the band for quite a while. Bass players, they kind of changed them, I think, on almost every album. In this set, you have 4 discs, 3 are CDs. You have the original album, a CD of demos and outtakes, a live CD, and then a DVD of them in concert. The next year, 1973, Roxy brought out their second album called For Your Pleasure. And this really showed the conflicts between Bryan Ferry's ideas and Brian Eno's ideas. I mean, they were two very, very strong personalities with very different visions of how they wanted the band to go. Now, if you got the album back in '73 and you opened it up, this was the full cover. Another lovely young lady on the cover. And then there are some other interesting fashion choices. And for some reason, they're all playing guitar in this photo. For Your Pleasure starts really strong with the song Do the Strand, which is sort of like a take on the old 60s and 50s songs, dance songs, like Let's Do the Twist and Let's Do the Mashed Potato. But it's a modern sounding song. And again, we have Bryan Ferry's playful lyrics such as Tired of the Tango, Fed Up with Fandango, Do the Strand, or Weary of the Waltz and Mashed Potatoed Schmaltz, Do the Strand. Another strong song on here is called Editions of You, and that was a favorite in concert because they allowed each player to do a solo. Another song that was very good in concert was called In Every Dream Home, a Heartache. This is a song about a man's obsession with his inflatable doll. And it ends with the infamous lyric, I blew up your body, but you blew my mind. And as you can see, offbeat subject matter for rock and roll songs. Interesting wordplay. The second side of this album had two very long, like 10 minutes or so, spacey, mostly instrumental pieces. One's called The Bogus Man, one's called For Your Pleasure. And you can really see Eno's influence in those songs. Now, this is after this album, Eno left the band and went to work with many other artists and did his own solo albums. And I'm a big Brian Eno fan, so I might do an episode about him at some other point. Their third album in 1973 is called Stranded. Now, Eno is no longer part of the band, but they're still experimenting with sonic effects, but it's more song-based. Once again, if you had the album, it opened up to this long cover photo, and there again we have a lovely young lady as the model. No pictures this time of their elaborate costumes, just sort of these Andy Warhol-esque photos of them. Eddie Jobson replaced Brian Eno as the keyboardist, and he's playing synthesizers, and surprisingly, he plays violin. Again, an unusual instrument for a rock and roll band. The songs range in length from 3 minutes to 8 minutes, and the humor and the wordplay is still intact. One of the most famous songs on here is called A Song for Europe, and includes the lyric, though the world is my oyster, it's only a shell full of memories. So kind of a tongue-in-cheek lyric by Bryan Ferry, and sometimes he puts on the persona of a world-weary European gentleman in some of these songs. Roxy Music's fourth album, and from 1974, was called Country Life. The cover was a little bit controversial. It showed a little bit of nudity, so I'm covering it up for YouTube purposes. And it did come out with a different cover, which was just the plants in the background and without the ladies on it. This expanded the sound of the previous album, Stranded. The songs were a little tighter though, shorter, but they're still experimenting with some interesting sonic effects, and they're still having some solos in some of the songs. There's even a song about Texas called Prairie Rose, and in one of the songs, the word ennui is used. Now, I don't think many rock and roll songs use the word ennui, so another example of Bryan Ferry's use of language in his music. Roxy Music's fifth album from 1975 is called Siren, and there again we have a lovely young lady on the cover. This time it's Jerry Hall, and she was going with Bryan Ferry for a couple of years. She then went on to marry Mick Jagger. They were married for about 9 years, and I believe the marriage was annulled for some reason. They had some kids together. Now she's married to none other than Rupert Murdoch. So she's my age, 64. So I don't understand how you can go from Bryan Ferry to Mick Jagger to Rupert Murdoch, but that's what she did. Siren is a little slicker. It's still taking chances. It's still got a lot of energy. They finally had a hit in the US with Love is the Drug. Now, when I first heard that, I thought, that's Roxy Music? Boy, it sure sounds different from their other stuff. And it also sounded a little, dare I say, a disco-ish. We'll get to that in a second. Two of the songs clock in at 6 minutes. Otherwise, they're all shorter than that. And I think Siren is their last great album. I would probably put Stranded first, but you know what? The first 5 I think are all just great. I could listen to any of them anytime. And you might be thinking, whoa, 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 hold on a second. What about Avalon? We're going to get to that in a second. A year later, Roxy Music brought out this live album, Viva Roxy Music. The songs live are somewhat modified. The song length goes from 3 minutes to 10 minutes. And the 10-minute one is The Bogus Man from the second album, which is unusual because that was such an Eno-esque type of song, and he's obviously not in the band anymore. Live, they added female backing vocals, and I was lucky enough to see them live twice. And they did have a couple of other live albums after this one. 3 years after Siren, it's 1979, Roxy Music puts out Manifesto. And as you can see, I don't have Manifesto. That's because it's terrible. There are no more experimental solos. There's no more wordplay and humor. They've been replaced with very mundane love song lyrics. There's a traditional song structure instead of different experimental structures. And there's even some disco textures added. So any of the elements that made Roxy Music unique and interesting and quirky are gone. And if you were a teenager in the 70s raised on rock and roll and heavy metal and even progressive rock, there was a saying, and the saying was, disco sucks because disco sucks. So to have disco show up in my beloved Roxy Music was rather disappointing. They followed this up in 1980 with an album called Flesh and Blood, which was probably just as bad, even though they did a version of the Byrds' 8 Miles High. That was okay. And that brings us to the beloved album Avalon in 1982. Easily Roxy Music's best-selling album. As you can see, once again, I don't own Avalon. I know, that's blasphemy, as people love the lush, elegant, romantic sound of it. For me, it just seems kind of bland and just washes over you. I miss the edgy, unpredictable, surprising, challenging, and even witty Roxy Music. In later years, some of the band members put out solo albums, mainly Brian Ferry. Several of his solo albums consisted of mainly cover songs, everything from the Beatles to Bob Dylan to pop songs from the 50s and 60s. And he put out a Dylan tribute album in 2007 called Dylan-esque, which is worth checking out. All Brian Ferry's albums, the musicianship is excellent, but the albums vary in quality. If my descriptions of early Roxy Music albums intrigued you, they're all available for streaming, they're all available for purchasing. Some of the songs are more accessible than others. Some do require some repeated listening, but I think you'll find it rewarding. If you're a big Avalon fan, I don't know if this is really going to be your cup of tea, but feel free to leave a comment or a suggestion. Leave a thumbs up. Don't leave a thumbs down. Subscribe would be great. Share this episode with your friends and family. Otherwise, hope you enjoyed this episode. I thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.